My presentation is intended to put into the debate the issue of hybridization. Hybridization is the concept, the key concept that I want to explore. And of course, the slides that I will project give only a very reductive synthesis of the paper, which is on the table anyway. In fact, I think that so far we have talked about hybridized entities, hybridized wars, hybridized work relations, and many other entities without focusing the concept of hybridization. So the impact of AI, robotics, and human relations will be dealt with in this way of looking at the interchange between human beings, human persons, and robots. Now, the basic contents of my paper start with a basic question. When does enhancement of social relations through robots be really human? And should it be? Should the enhancement be human or something else? Because sometimes I think that some people think that enhancement of social relations should be more than human or post-human, in other words. So we'll go through four main points very briefly. The first one is about the emergence of what I call the digital technological matrix, DTM. I will treat digital technological matrix as a vision of society, as a way of rethinking what once upon a time were called the grand recit. This matrix is the grand recit of our times and possibly of the future. And this DTM, to my mind, stems from the mixing up of what Minsky called the society of mind and what I call the society of humans. The second point is about the clarification of the hybridization of social relations, identities, and social forms as a morphogenic process. Hybridization is a way in which we can represent, in a sense, co-evolution between robots and human beings. Then I will end up with the three scenarios dealing with the hybridization of our society induced by the DTM, and finally, if there is time, issues of social regulations of AI robots. Now, if the question is, do social relations generated through robots contribute one way or another to the humanization of society? Sorry, I didn't plot. Do they contribute one way or another to the humanization of society, or do they lead elsewhere? We've talked about using robots in the education of children, caring for the elderly, and so on. So in order to ask this question, we have to ask ourselves which kind of relationality can be produced or allowed by robots. So the problem is about the qualities and causal properties of this kind of relationality, which is produced in the interaction, interchange between robots or AIs and human beings. Now, this question involves a series of problems. The first one is what kind of mind the AI robot has compared to the human one. We have talked a lot about that. My position is that the mind of the human being and the mind of the robot are incommensurable orders of reality for two reasons. The first one is that the human mind is linked to the human body in a way in which the artificial mind of the robot is not linked to its body. And the second reason is that, so the first reason is that the body-mind complex is radically different in human beings and in robots. So there is no way to compare them in this sense. And the second reason is that human beings and robots are structurally different in the way they relate within themselves and with the environment. So there are structurally different inside-out and outside-in relationality of consciousness. The second great issue is whether, and if positive, how the interaction between robot and human person can turn into a social relationship. I will discuss the difference between interaction and the relationship, because many times people do not distinguish between them. The third reason is that assuming the social relations inform, that is, put a form into people's identities and social organizations, how a robot can inform a human and how a human can inform a robot. These are very, very serious questions. For instance, if we take this picture and we ask, is that an interaction or a relationship? We should discuss a lot about that. I mean, I don't have time enough, but we could talk hours and hours. My suggestion is to make reference to a scheme and to a figure in which it's clarified how interactions work in respect to relations. So the figure here is about the place of social relation in the making of the social fabric. We have to start with the environment, with the social context where social interactions happen. Now, the social context could be the internet, could be the financial market, could be the battlefield, could be the classroom, because depending on the social context, social interactions, of course, take different meanings and different ways to be done. Now, interactions happen in the temporal phase T2, T3 between ego and alter. Now, we have to consider who are ego and alter. Are they two humans? Is there a human being and a robot, two robots? What kind of actors do we have there? Because, of course, the result of these interactions would be different. Now, what I'm saying is that from the social interactions beyond the phase T2, T3, there is an emergent at time 4. So a new relational structure. So we can distinguish the interactional order within the phase T2, T3 from the relational order, which is the emergent as a process and as a relational structure in itself. Now, the issue is that we cannot explain the emergent only knowing what is ego and what is alter. Because the emergent is precisely something different. It's a third reality in respect to the actors. For instance, ego and alter can be both virtuous as individuals, while the emergent relational structure could be bad, could be a relational evil instead of being a relational good. Now, the relational good of which we talk, in the case it is the emergent, is defined by the fact that it brings benefits to both agents, ego and alter, anyway, brings benefits to the participants who share the interactions. So the moral and the ethical aspect of the relationship is in the emergent, not really only in the interaction, and not only within each actor as an individual, be it human or non-human. So what is that when we look at a figure like that one, a picture taken in a firm, and we ask what kind of relationships are there? There is a network, there is a human person, a guy there with many robots, and there is a whole network between this man and the robots. There are relations, structural relations between the robots, and there are many other kinds of relations there, and we should make a network analysis. Sorry. This is the picture, and we should make an analysis of this network, the whole network, asking what is its centrality, its density, its multiplexity, and so on and so forth, in order to understand how the process of hybridization goes on in such a context. Also, the analysis of this situation will take a lot of time, of course. So I want to speak about the hybridization process driven by the digital technological matrix that emerges through the mixing up of the society of mind and the society of human. Now, what is my definition of the digital technological matrix? I mean the globalized symbolic code from which the digital artifacts are created in order to help or substitute or modify the human agency and social relations. In this sense, it is a vision, a narrative. It's not only an artifact, it's not only a means, a tool by which we reorganize our world in terms of new entities like AIs and robots. Now, in this figure, I try to make more clear the process of hybridization as a morphogenetic cycle which generates what I call a DTM society, a society driven by a digital technological matrix. The idea is that starting from the cultural domain on the left side, which is in a way we can define it as a science, as what we know in the scientific field, which is part of the cultural domain. And in the cultural domain, new ideas are created or invented or taken into consideration. For instance, the idea of the qubit is something new, which is part of the cultural domain, and it produces a cultural conditioning intervening on social cultural interactions from which cultural hybrids are created. Now, cultural hybrids in form, that is, put a form into the human agency. They contribute to the morphogenesis of the human agency. That is, they change the body-mind complex. And from here, the human agency gets into the structural domain on the right side, which is, let's say, the technological world, the hardware of the digital technological matrix, which is in a way the place where structural conditioning produces structural interactions and creates structural hybrids. Humanoids are structural hybrids in a way, and they represent opportunities and constraints for the human agency again, because they elicit, in a way, a new way of being of the human agency, and the process, the cycle, goes on again and again. So to produce the morphogenesis of the human agency, which means changing through hybridization the identity of the human being and also her relationships. So in order to clarify the concept of hybridization, I can simply define it in the following way. The hybridization of people's identities, human relations, and organizations consists in the fact that these entities change their relational constitution by mixing the analogical and the digital codes. That is, there is an interaction between what we call analog reality and virtual reality, producing what we call hybridization. Just to give an idea of ordinary life, an example of hybridized relationships could be that kind of picture where people do not have real interactions between them. They have potential relations. There are relations there, but we cannot see them because they are isolated, completely isolated between them, although they are connected with the world through the internet. Now, we can analyze the process, the historical process through which hybridization proceeds, and in this sense, I think it would take a lot of time to comment upon the whole picture there, but I think that it's enough to say that we go from the analogical way of communicating to people and also of knowing the reality to a kind of knowledge and communication which, being digital, are mentalized and hybridized. So from, let's say, the mechanical machines in the industrial society in which what we called human society was anthropocentric, we pass on through the society of mind, which is anthropoeccentric. Now, what will be a DTM-driven society, the scenario for the digital society, the future of the world, depends on the types and degrees of mastery over ITCs, AI, and robots. What will happen is that social relations will meet new divides and inequalities because there will be a clear distinction between human-centered versus human-decentered relations. Of course, they will hybridize, but anyway, the distinction will be necessary in order to orient ourselves. Now, in the end, I think we will meet three scenarios of what we call a morphogenic society. What I call an adaptive scenario, or a turbulent scenario, and a steered scenario. This is the let me try to explain that the hybridization of social relations, identities, and social forms depends on actors and networks' reflexivity in the morphogenetic process. What I mean? I mean that depending on the context network in which human persons must relate themselves to machines in the frame of the DTM, the interactions between people and sentient machines could be of many different kinds of reflexivity. There could be a conformist reflexivity dependent on the machine. There could be an independent reflexivity or a critical reflexivity or a reflexivity impaired by total identification with the machine, or also a broken reflexivity of people and of their relations. So depending on the kind of reflexivity which governs the interactions, there will be a different emergent in terms of a new network of social relations and so on and so forth. I don't have time enough to get into the three possible scenarios, which are quite intuitive: the adaptive, the turbulent, the relational steered. The adaptive morphogenesis produces hybrids by trial and error, as we have seen in the case of cyber wars, etc., etc. The turbulent morphogenesis favors mutations, real mutations, and is characterized by very contingent and experimental organizations. This is the theory of singularity and so on and so forth. While another possibility is what I call relationally steered morphogenesis, that aims to configure technologies that can favor relational goods. So the summary on the ongoing processes of hybridization is the following: that we need further analysis in terms of these three topics. First of all, the adaptability of human beings to the DTM, to the matrix. Second, on the mutations propelled by the turbulent morphogenesis. Third, on how relational steering of processes can manage social relationships between robots and humans, so to produce those relational goods that realize a virtuous human fulfillment. About the terms of social regulation, I'm going to the conclusion. I have put on my paper the recommendations of the European Union, the 7 essentials for achieving trustworthy AI, and the House of Lords report. There is not time to get into all these, probably you know all of them. What I'm saying, and this is my conclusion, that these general principles are only wishful thinking. They are difficult to implement in the absence of a clear social anthropology, and second, are not at all sufficient to prevent the negative perverse effects of the DTM, of the digital matrix, because they do not, this is the reason, because they do not sufficiently take into account the relational nature of the human person and of the social formations in which her personality develops. That's my conclusion. Thank you very much.